Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Mark Headley, joined by my lovely wife, Claire, today.
Claire Headley here. Thanks so much for being here. And we are going to delve deep into the new series that I've begun on life after Scientology. It's been now, we're coming up on our 20th anniversary of our escapes, coming up in January of this coming year. And so there's many different books and podcasts and TV shows and documentaries and so much amazing material, not only on Scientology, but also on recovering from cults, the control mechanisms of cults, and all the different intricacies. And so we thought it would be good to delve into some of the many helpful resources out there and some of the things I've done. And then we'll talk about how those things helped and take suggestions also on what to talk about. And this is not going to be limited to Scientology, though, of course, Scientology will remain our focus. But there are so many parallels in so many other organizations. For example, I've just finished reading Scarred, which is the book by Sarah Edmondson on the Nixium cult. And much of that was derived from Scientology by Keith Raniere, who's now in prison. Way to go, Sarah. Anyway, so yeah, we're going to go deep into all these things. Some of the books we're going to talk about today this is just the introduction to give an idea of what we're planning to talk about, what we're going to cover, and so forth. So this is not going to be a deep dive on any particular book in this episode, but again, we just really want to talk about what the path has been like on starting our lives completely over from scratch and what helped.
Yeah, because a lot of the things that you read in Scientology and the courses you do, you read a lot of L. Ron Hubbard's writings, and it's wall to wall L. Ron Hubbard the entire time. Every course you do, you have to read L. Ron Hubbard policies or L. Ron Hubbard bulletins on the way things are. And if you're in Scientology for many, many years, you treat all this as fact. And when you leave Scientology, there's this sort of thing like, well, what if that was true and what if that was not true, or what if that was just made up? And when you read some of these books about Hubbard starting Scientology and his history and his L. Ron Hubbard's history according to the documents and according to the facts, and L. Ron Hubbard's history according to L. Ron Hubbard, are two very different things. And Scientology does a lot of work to sort of cover up L. Ron Hubbard's past and his previous wives and family and children and so on. So when you read some of these books, it does peel a lot of the nonsense off, and it lets you see, oh, this is actually what happened. And that, in a way, helps you sort of realize, oh, there might have been more BS than there was actual factual items.
Yes,
so,
completely. It's very much, yeah, in my opinion, it's very much a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type scenario. That I was most struck by that during the depositions in our lawsuits in 2009 to 2012, where Scientology was literally taking private emails that I had sent, for example, to my mother, and just turning it on me to manipulate me. But but you're right, there are so many things that, for us, having grown up in Scientology, we just accept it as fact. And then come to find out, no, there's very different facts in the outside world that are backed up with extensive documentation that prove otherwise. And I think the key first step is just to simply start asking questions to be able to think for yourself and separate out, am I thinking this because I was indoctrinated to think this, or am I thinking this because there's facts and knowledge I've learned that proves otherwise?
Yeah, I think I want to say it was in the Tampa Bay Times, St. Pete Times Truth Rundown series when these reporters, Tobin and Thomas Tobin and Joe Childs, were asking Tommy Davis a bunch of questions, and I don't remember exactly how it came out or how it came up, but there was questions about L. Ron Hubbard's war record because L. Ron Hubbard claimed to be blind and crippled at the end of the war. And through the use of the technology he came up with, Dianetics, he healed himself and then was able to live life. And Tommy Davis,
Allegedly,
yeah, well,
allegedly.
Tommy Davis, the spokesperson at the time, said, well, you're saying that this didn't happen. So if that didn't happen, then that would mean that everything that Scientology was based on would be lies. And it was like, yeah, you get it now. And so that is factually what you would come away with. If you read some of these books, you'd be like, oh, he made everything up. Like from the very, very beginning, it was all made up. So,
Yeah.
so you want me to bring up the first cover of the first book you wanted to?
Yeah, well, before we do that, I just wanted to comment on one other thing. I think
Yeah.
that in my own experience, and also from what we've seen through the work of the Aftermath Foundation, very often when someone comes out of Scientology, their first step is never like, oh, I need to go see a psychologist and get sorted out. That's never the first step. And especially for me personally, from from the age of from the earliest ages I can remember. I mean, I think probably 5 or 6 is the my earliest memory specifically of being indoctrinated that psychologists and psychiatrists are evil. I didn't even know what that meant at that age. Obviously, I came to understand that much more later, but it was never like I was never going to talk to anybody. My initial frame of mind when we first left, and I'd be interested to hear yours, was okay. We got out, we escaped, lock the door on those on all of those years, and just walk away and start fresh. But of course, that's unrealistic. But what were your thoughts on that, honey?
I was just happy to get some sleep. I was happy to get some sleep and not have to put up with any nonsense. But I really thought early on that I mean, I really cover this in detail in my book, but I realized when we were just about to leave in January of 2005 that everything that we were being told we were doing, we weren't. So we were told we were building all these new organizations and they were expanding, and I had for the past prior months I had been visiting these organizations to upgrade their audiovisual systems, and they were all empty, every single one. It wasn't just like it was just an off day. Everyone was empty every single day that I ever went to any one of them. They were all empty. And I thought, wow, this is after 15 years of doing this, and they're more empty than they were when I was a kid in the 1980s. They were empty, like nobody there. So for me, I just realized, oh, if we're being told lies and we're the ones doing all the work, well, then everyone's being lied to, like just
Yeah.
100% across the boards. This is all a bunch of nonsense. And not that we weren't even doing the job. It was we were just wasting our time. There was
Mhm.
nothing. I mean, for years when we worked at Golden Air Productions, when I first was working there, we were making cassettes and we were making 50,000 cassettes every single week. And they were selling not even 1,000 cassettes every week. So every single week we were making 49,000 cassettes that were going to be thrown away. And we did that for 10 years.
Yeah.
So it was sort of like and eventually we switched to compact discs, and there were millions and millions of cassettes that were still in the shrink wrap, still waiting to be sold. and we erased them all. We erased 10 years worth of work in like a couple of months. And it was sort of like this, it kind of broke my brain that that I stayed up. There was probably 1,000 all-nighters that went into making those. And we just,
Right.
they never, nothing at, we stayed up, we made them, we packaged them, we put them into boxes, we shrink wrapped, we taped up the boxes, we moved the boxes, then we moved the boxes again, then we moved the boxes again. Every time, every few years, they would change where the storage was. And we just, and then we ended up just erasing them. So it was sort of like, are you kidding me? And even the compact discs that we were making, whenever I ever saw a Scientologist that had these things, they were still in the shrink wrap. So even
Hmm.
even when the Scientologists bought the CDs, they never listened to them. They
Right.
just left them in the package. So it was sort of like, why are we wasting our time with any of this? And even the
Hmm.
films, we have this series where Mitch Brisker and I talk about all these films that we shot. The only people that are allowed to see those films are the people that are going into Scientology organizations to do training on courses in Scientology. And there's nobody in the organizations. So no one's watching those films. So it's sort of just
Right.
like, this is just a giant exercise in futility and a giant waste of everyone's time and money.
Yeah, and
So
meanwhile, our lives were completely miserable, and we're only getting worse.
yeah, the other thing they always say is they said, like, if you ever wanted to take a day off or if you wanted to go visit your family, or is like the whole world will stop turning if you leave. Like, you
Yep.
can't leave the property for any reason because who's going to do your job and how are we going to clear the planet and all this other stuff. And then when we left, obviously somebody's doing those jobs, I guess, that we were
Hmm.
doing because we're not there anymore. And you would see that when somebody would escape, it would just be like, oh, everything's going to go. The world didn't actually stop turning after that person left and escaped.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I'm not, I think, I read a ton of things on the internet, and I read different people's books that had left Scientology, and every single time I would read one of those, it was like same shit, different toilet. They had the
Hmm.
same exact things happening, even if they were in a totally different place. If they were in the UK, or if they were in Clearwater, Florida, or if they were at the base where we were, no matter where you were, the same nonsense was being done in all these different places. So it's sort
Right.
of, it's a good thing to find out the truth about Hubbard, and it's a good thing to see what other people went through, because then you start thinking, oh, it wasn't me. Up until then, in Scientology, the way you're indoctrinated is if anything is wrong, you're supposed to look inward. What did you do? What
Right.
if what thoughts are you having? What have you done to do something good, or whatever? It's all inward. You could never question Scientology. So then when you read these other accounts from other people that were in the Sea Org, that were a Scientologist, you go like, oh, it wasn't just me. Every single person was having the same internal battles with, how can I make this make sense? It just doesn't make sense. And then you do learn, when you get out of Scientology, never try to make it make sense. That is never going to happen. You can never sort of if you take everything that L. Ron Hubbard wrote, it contradicts itself everywhere. So it's impossible to make sense of it
Yep.
because he's contradicted himself somewhere. And that is actually, to be perfectly honest, that is one of the things that David Miscavige has been struggling with the entire time we were at the international headquarters. He was constantly trying to weed out things in Scientology that contradicted other things in Scientology. And that quest was never ending. Every time they'd find something out, they'd be like, oh, we uncovered this thing, or we were able to remaster a recording, and now we found all this stuff that he talked about here, and it contradicts a whole bunch of other things. And it was sort of like, well, what are we going to do with this? Because he says in here X is actually B, and he said in this other thing that X is 100% A, and there's no way that it could possibly be B. And so you go like, well, you know so it's just for someone for someone who's still, if you're still in Scientology, if you're involved with Scientology and you're watching this, if you're having these questions, that's why you're not allowed to ask questions. That there's a reason why you're
Yep.
never allowed to question or even have a thought like, well, maybe L. Ron Hubbard didn't know what he was talking about in this instance. That's not a possibility. L. Ron Hubbard,
Right.
everything that he ever said was the most correct thing according to Scientology. So you can never, and I think that's where it kind of falls down, is that they say he's just a man and he did this and he did that, but at the same time, you have to follow everything he said to the T, to the letter. And some of those things are very, very silly, and most of those things are completely insane. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah,
completely. And
so
I would encourage anyone thinking about those questions, do the research yourself on your own terms. Find out, ask those questions, because that is the first step. And it can only get better from there. For me, and the books we're going to talk about today, one of the very first things I thought, well, I don't want to say bad things. I don't want to think bad things, but what's wrong with reading a book? I can read a book and decide whether I agree with it or not agree with it, but it's on my own terms. It's not because someone told me. It's just I'm going to read it and see what I think for myself.
totally. Yeah, the only
Yeah.
other thing I'd want to say, if somebody who's currently involved in Scientology is watching this, is that there are documented to be around 100,000 ex Scientologists. Okay. And it's pretty much been well documented that there's about 20 to 25,000 active Scientologists, maybe a little lower than that these days. But so the number of ex Scientologists outnumber current Scientologists at least 5 to 1. And there's
Right.
probably more ex Scientologists out there that are pretending to maybe still be Scientologists, or they're
Yep.
under the radar, or they just don't go to the organization and their kids are Scientologists, or whatever. But I'm just saying, the end product of being a Scientologist is being an ex Scientologist. That is how this route goes. You will be
Yep.
an ex Scientologist sooner or later. So you're every additional minute or every additional dollar that you waste on Scientology is a wasted minute and a wasted dollar. There's
Right.
no good that's going to come out of it in the end. And Scientology certainly not using the money for good.
Nope.
So yeah, that's my take.
Yep. Agreed with all of that. So, yes, you're going to pull up the first book cover here. Okay. So, this is Russell Miller's Barefaced Messiah, the true story of L. Ron Hubbard, a brilliant expose of Scientology's con man king, says John Sweeney. Yes. So, this was one of the very first books that I read, and my mind was blown. I mean, I got to the point where I thought, I don't think there's one fact I've ever been told about L. Ron Hubbard in the first 30 years of my life, from birth to age 30, that was actually true. Of
Yeah,
course, there were snippets here and there, but they were so blown up and expanded. And anyway, hopefully, I'm going to definitely delve into that book. And but that is for sure I think the closest thing that exists to a biography of L. Ron Hubbard's life. And to my knowledge, John Atak was very extensively involved with the research for that book as well. I'll be doing an interview with John shortly, and I'll definitely ask him about that part as well. But the other thing that was amazing about Barefaced Messiah, so I have to look when that came out, but I think it was I want to say the early 80s. But Russell Miller documents in the introduction to the book how much he was fair gamed because he wrote this book. And so that too was just a testament to the fact that Like every single person that spoke out about Scientology, especially in the early days, was subjected to some crazy, crazy fair game. So again,
Lawsuits and framed for crimes they didn't commit. You name it,
yes,
they used lawfare to attack them, and if that didn't work, they used their dirty tricks department, which back then was the Guardian's office. Yeah, it's also
7:34 p.m.
was that you or me?
that was you.
Oh, I leaned on my watch and it started talking. Um, anyway, yeah, they really did go hard on these people and attacking them and trying to make it so the book couldn't be published, and all of these things that these first people went through that wrote books on Scientology was pretty amazing when you look back at it and all the things that they went through and everything that Scientology did, and for what? For finding the records, the war records of L. Ron Hubbard, and actually getting the correspondence and finding okay, he went, what's it, school did he say he went to? These type of things. And then you get
Right.
that, you find out, oh, he was a dropout. Oh, he bombed an island, a Mexican island, and they said and he basically got kicked out of doing that or fired from doing, all these things. And you go like, oh, that's not the way Scientology tells it. They have a magazine called Ron, Master Mariner. They have
Yeah.
they have
Yeah.
they make up all these big things about him, like how he was, he was so cool his shit didn't stink. And meanwhile, he was a madman. He literally
Right.
was crazy, doing crazy stuff. And the funny part is that L. Ron Hubbard talks little snippets about little things where he did stuff when he was before Scientology. And like if he was on a Navy ship, then Scientology makes it into he's a master mariner and he did this and he did that and he captained this and he was able to captain. Wasn't that another thing they say? He's able to captain any ship in all 7 seas, or something like that, in any
Yeah.
ocean, and you're just
Yeah.
like, what?
And they had the whole thing about Ron the explorer, Ron the photographer. And yeah, and it's funny because actually for me, as someone just freshly getting out, when I was reading Barefaced Messiah the first time, the reading about everything Scientology did to fair game Russell Miller actually served to confirm to me that yes, they do have something to hide, and they are just trying to squash this because it's true. And that's been my perspective ever since then. Like you can always see it from a mile away. That they're just trying to silence a person, silence us, scare us, whatever. And it just reaffirms that actually the person's on the right track.
Yeah, totally. And the
Yeah.
other thing about this book is it's really it really talks about things that Scientology won't tell you about. So
Right.
they'll tell you the glossed over version of L. Ron Hubbard's life, but even when there's a Hubbard interview, Hubbard was married 3 times, and his last wife went to prison for him. She was one of the people convicted in that because she was running the Guardian's office, which was the Scientology dirty tricks department. She was running that for Hubbard. And so when they got caught infiltrating the United States government, she went to jail and fell on the sword for Hubbard so that he went scot-free. But
Right.
when asked about his wife that he was married to before Mary Sue, he actually said, they said, "What about your second wife?" And he said, "Oh, I never had a second wife." And then you're like, "But you were married before Mary Sue, so what is Mary Sue?" But it literally was like the wife in the middle was just erased.
Oh, I get your point. Yeah, like I don't have a second wife, but so
But
you
you've
don't have
been,
a second wife, but you do have a third wife.
yeah. Anyway, it's one of those things that's just It's always makes me it always makes me giggle when I think about this, when he said, "Oh, I never had a second wife." And you're like, anyway.
Yeah, no,
But
I get it.
even things
Totally.
like that are just the silliest things that they're covering up. But then when you look into it, it's like, oh yeah, no, his previous wives were not friendly towards him at all. And in
Yeah.
one instance, he took their kid, and the wife had to do a bunch of stuff to get the kid back. And so there's a lot of controversy surrounding these two women that he was married to previously. And in Scientology, they don't exist. There's no
Yeah.
record of those in the story of Scientology. What the I think I want to say it's the second wife, maybe even the third wife, have been photoshopped out of pictures that he was in. There's a very
Yes.
widely used picture of L. Ron Hubbard, and he's sitting on this little yacht. I wish we had it, but he's sitting on this yacht, and he's got these kind of like alien looking sunglasses on, and he's got his little hat, his little sailor hat, and he's actually sitting next to his wife in that picture, but she's been photoshopped out, and they use that picture all the time when they show him. They want to like harken back to his seafaring days. They use that picture.
Yeah.
It's probably even on the cover or heavily featured in one of these magazines called what is it called? The Ron series, and it's like a
Yeah, the
magazine,
Ron series
and
that were
it's
written by Danny Sherman.
yeah. Oh, yeah, and that's
Yeah.
another great thing. You said it earlier. This is sort of like the only valid biography of L. Ron Hubbard. Well, Scientology has been working on an L. Ron Hubbard biography since since Hubbard was still around, and
Yeah.
it never comes out because everything that Scientology tries to say about him is provable as a lie. And so if they put out an actual book saying this stuff, it would be laughable because somebody could just go through it and go, no, not true. No, not true. Um, Even silly things. I think it's in Barefaced Messiah where they talk about the Blackfoot Indian thing, and
Yeah.
how Hubbard claimed he was a blood brother of the Blackfeet Indian tribe and all this other stuff. And then the Blackfoot Indian folks are like, we don't do blood brothers in our tribe. That's not one of our things.
Right.
So it's like Hubbard just made up a fact based on what he saw in a movie or a TV show or a book about the blood brothers, assuming, oh, they all do that. They don't. So it's
Right.
just little silly little details like that where you go like, okay, so he wasn't, even that. It's like, you're making you're making up stories about when he was we're talking about when he was like 9 years old that
Yeah.
this happened. So they're making up stories about Hubbard when he was 9 or 12 or whatever. He was the youngest Eagle Scout, and then that's usually when they roll out the blood brother of the Blackfoot Indian, and
Yeah.
it's just
And
like,
all of these were stories that Hubbard himself told. So therefore, Scientology's approach was, well, we just need to find where this happened because of course he said these things happened, but let's not forget he is a science fiction writer. He is a storyteller.
yeah,
So
fiction is the key word in that. He is a
fiction is the
fiction
key
writer.
word. Yes.
I don't think he wrote anything else than fiction. He always wrote fiction, including
That's
all of
right.
his. They say his fiction funded his Scientology work. No, his fiction funded his fiction work. Okay, his fiction funded more fiction.
Uh, yep, there you go.
Okay. Did you have anything else on that one, or you want to show me?
No, no. So we'll include the links to the books, these books that we're talking about today. And again, this is not the only books we're going to talk about. We're just kind of wanting to outline the purpose of what we're going to be talking about in this series. And we'll be talking to authors of these books and again, books from other cults as well to kind of talk about the similarities because at least again from my perspective it has really helped to learn about other people's experiences and then it has helped me many times to gain perspective on my own experience to reflect on wow yeah I didn't even consider that or even just talking about in our experiences and seeing other people's reactions to what we say like sometimes even that helps me to process, like go, wow, they're kind of shocked by what I'm saying right now. I didn't think it was that shocking.
Yeah, the other thing is, I've seen some people where they're talking about what they went through, and I do that. I did that in my book. So we don't really talk about a lot of that we're not going to talk about that necessarily in this series, but even in our other videos, we just say like things that happened and, try to tell stories of different things where people worked and, what things we did and, Sea Org questions and stuff like that. But I don't feel that it's very helpful to relive the most horrible of horrible experiences. I wrote about a lot of those in my book, and even some of them I didn't include in there because they were so crazy that we took things out because it would be like, no one's going to believe that this
Yeah.
happened. And so we took out a bunch of things that were just like over the top, like, I don't know. And even
Well,
some of the
and
things that we
but I
left
should
in, people
add,
are like,
yeah, but I should add that a big part of that though was also that we were expecting Scientology to come after us and sue us. So every single story, anecdote, whatever that you left in your book was something that somebody outside of Scientology could attest to in this
yes,
moment, you know, and so maybe we were overly cautious, but Scientology had prepared to file a lawsuit on us, which we found out in subsequent years they didn't. And then of course we went through our lawsuit with them, which was 4 years of pretty rough. I mean, that was hellish. It was
yeah.
but either way, my point being that it was a very intentional strategy not to necessarily omit anything significant, but just to include what we could defend legally if it came to that.
Yeah, the other thing was that there were certain people that were at certain things that happened in the book, or they were around for, or they were privy to, that had left. And I knew that those
Yes.
people, I talked to a bunch of these people and was like, "Hey, do you remember when this happened?" And be like, "Oh yeah, I was there." And do you remember who else was there? Yeah, same people. Okay, good. But then the funny thing is that there's a lot of things that happened where a lot of those people that were around that were in, they're now out. So it's kind of a crazy thing that some of those things that we didn't really include, a lot of those people are out now and they would be able
Yeah.
to say, and we've talked about those things we've talked about on lives and,
Yeah.
we get together with some of these people and we talk about this in videos, um, but
Because
yeah,
your book was released November 5th, 2009, right?
yeah, yeah. So there's been, I want to say there's been a few hundred people that have left or they're not in the Sea Org anymore, but they might still be involved with Scientology because their family are still involved with Scientology, but they're not making any trouble because they signed some paperwork and they got written a little check. Um, that's another thing a lot of people don't know. When you left the Sea Org in 2005, they didn't give you anything if you left without telling them.
Nope.
But even if you like properly did all your interrogations and you just said, I don't want to be here, or I'm going to off myself if I have to stay, then they would let those people go. And they would usually get them. Then they would just give them $250 or $500 and just give them a plane ticket to somewhere. Now they're
Right.
writing these people checks for tens of thousands of dollars. If you've recently left the Sea Org and you didn't get a check for 10 or 20,000, you guys got ripped because they're handing out checks. But when you sign an NDA and somebody gives you $50,000 or gives you $300,000 or gives you 500,000 or whatever the amount is, that's a little bit more legally binding. Also, some of these people that may have joined when they were children, when they were 16 or 15, or like in our cases, 15 and 16 or whatever it was. Now these people are in their 30s or 40s. And when they're making you read it on video and there's a lawyer there and you're saying, yes, I read it and I'm agreeing and I'm taking this check right here. And, they've got pretty wrapped up in terms of if that person turns on them, then they're just going to bring out the law. It's going to be a lawfare thing. And then you're toast because they have an unlimited legal budget.
Yep.
I mean, they've got the same attorneys as Walmart. Okay. They're paying
Right.
some dough for attorneys.
Yeah.
So, okay, you want
And
to
in
show me?
our experience, several times, they absolutely want us embroiled and tied up in legal because they know they can outpurchase us in lawyers any day of the week.
Yeah.
And
Also,
so,
if you're
yeah.
doing that with them, you're not doing anything else because that will take up all your time. You're not going to have a lot of
Well, yeah,
spare.
and yeah, and even during the 4 years that our lawsuit was ongoing, our lawyers said, "You cannot speak publicly while the
Yeah.
lawsuit is ongoing." And so then, of course, um, we did what they told us to do, and it's not that it had no impact. We've been told of many people of the impact that our lawsuit had on Scientology in terms of things that they changed directly as a result. But nonetheless, it's not for the faint of heart. That's my point, I guess.
Yeah. And to be fair, even though they told us not to say anything, we did say things.
Yeah. We were
Just
in a
saying
few documentaries
they
here and there, you know.
cautious us not to say anything, but every
Yeah.
once in a while we,
But then every time we
drop the
did, it resulted in like 5 more hours of deposition. It
book.
was very frustrating. That's true.
It was a lot. It was a lot.
Yeah,
Okay,
it
next
was.
book. Next book.
All right. Let's sell these people a piece of blue sky. Hubbard, Dianetics, and Scientology by John Atack. And I'm in the middle of rereading this now, but it is a brilliant book. We won't go into a lot of detail, but I think, and I'll be talking with John at length about this as well. But I think this is a great starting book for anyone just beginning to ask questions, to just give it a read and start thinking things through and see what questions you have or what you don't have. I think it's probably one of the most leveled approaches to deconstructing the indoctrination and programming of Scientology. And like I said, it's absolutely something that was very, very helpful to me personally. And again, is another example of a book that Scientology tried to shut down. I mean, John has said many times he was in, under lawsuits and legal and in the courts for years. And finally, they struck one paragraph, I think, in the end, which had to do with Margaret Hodkin, who ironically started the Scientology school in England called Greenfields, but had previously worked for the Guardian's office. So, full circle.
We did
But
cover
either way,
that. We did cover that in a recent live, but I didn't realize that the school in UK had also been started by Guardian's office staff members or
yes,
ex-members. But
several.
but the same exact thing happened in the States. The Delphi schools were also infiltrated and filled with ex-Guardian's office staff. And even one of the guys who went to jail for doing the largest infiltration of the United States government in his history for Scientology, his name was Henning Helt. And Henning Helt was the dean or the headmaster of the Delphi Academy in Los Angeles. He just got out of jail and then he became that. I want to say it was either his first job or very shortly after there. That's when he got that job because it was in the early 1980s. So he went to
It's just so
jail
crazy.
and it was like, that's the guy that gets the head school. I mean, that's how Scientology rolls, guys. If you
Yeah.
just got out of prison for the largest infiltration into the United States government in its history, you could be a Scientology headmaster. I
Oh
should
my
find the
gosh,
yearbook. I should
it's
find the yearbook
insanity.
that I don't know if I have that yearbook because that was an 80s yearbook. But yeah,
I'm pretty
so
sure I know where to find one.
okay, great. And
Yeah.
also, John was a Scientologist.
Yes. Yes,
So
he was at St. Hill in England at the same time that I was there, except I was, 7 years old and in the cadet org, so our paths never crossed. But yes, no, absolutely.
we'll put a link to that book. We'll put a link to all the books that we talk about in today's thing. We'll put a link to them in the description. So if you guys want to go out and check those out. And by the way, most of these are available on Kindle, or Audible. And Claire actually has a copy, an original of the Scandal of Scientology, a paperback. But
Yes.
yeah, we
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that one. I don't know about that one. I think that one's on Kindle. I think you can get that one on Kindle.
Yeah, I think so. Or it's absolutely available online too, but we'll try to include the best official links. But again, all three of these books are
No,
early
I,
books
I
on.
wanted. We didn't show that one.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No, you
That's
mentioned it
the
though.
other one that we're talking about. Scandal of Scientology by Paulette Cooper. A chilling examination of the nature, beliefs, and practices of the now religion. And if you
And
guys
look
haven't,
at this. The book The Scientologists Tried to Stop. Oh
yeah,
boy, and then some. That's an understatement right
and
there. But
and
yes.
this, yeah, and this actually ties into this book ties into this thing that I was talking about, because when the FBI raided Scientology in the late 1970s, they found documents in the files, and mind you, Scientology knew they were coming. They had been shredding documents like crazy, people, all the way up until the FBI raided them, and they had gotten rid of a ton of things. And even then, whatever the FBI was able to documents the FBI was able to get their hands on when they did in fact raid it, they found these documents where Scientology had essentially framed and was terrorizing Paulette Cooper. And we'll actually put a link to it. But Tony Ortega wrote a whole book about that specifically, called The Unbreakable Mrs. Lovely. That was her code,
Miss Lovely.
Miss
Yes.
Lovely.
Miss
That was her
Lovely.
code name in some of these documents.
Yes.
Miss
And
Lovely.
I'll be covering that book too. But again, these are some of the early books, and Scientology's reaction to them should be enough for anybody in their right mind to go, you know what? If you really want to find out about Scientology, then, hey, look at hear all voices in this topic and ask yourself questions and ask yourself, what the facts are.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, these and again, all three of these authors went through hell to get these books to people. So,
Yeah.
to be honest, I bet you any author of a Scientology related book has gone through some nonsense to get that book. I mean, even when we were just getting ready to put out my book in 2009, we had spoken to other ex Scientologists who'd written books. And in some cases, the publishers had been threatened so massively by Scientology that the publishers paid the person to write the book and then never published it. But since the publisher was the one who owned the book, they couldn't even publish their own book because they sold it to the publisher.
Yeah.
So yeah, and even these people today that are writing books about Scientology, Scientology puts out hate sites and takes up Google ads for people that are exposing Scientology, and then they put their hate sites or hate ads about those people. So it's not a light thing to write a book on Scientology. If somebody's written a book on Scientology, it's probably worth a read, because there's craziness that's going on in there. And I'd say if you read more than 5 books on Scientology, then you're going to see a pattern, and
Yeah.
you're going to see there's a lot of people getting used, and there's a lot of money being made, and there ain't much else, anything happening besides that. Those are the 2 big things that are happening. There's a lot of hub, and there's a lot of controversy, but what's happening? Nothing's happening. No one's
Right.
going anywhere. No one's doing anything. They're just making money, and they're buying property, and they're breaking up families. That's, those are the main exports of Scientology:
Yeah.
broken families and empty properties.
And people held against their will, and lives being destroyed in many different ways. So yeah, every step, everything we can do to expose any of this, we're here for that.
Awesome. Well, I think that was a pretty good one. We'll probably have some of these interviews coming out in the next few weeks. Claire's got a whole bunch of great people lined up. And we're going to keep contacting people. If you want to, if you have a story or if you have a book, or go ahead and feel free to write down in the comments. If you want to send a message to us, you can go to blownforgood.com. We have a contact us page. You can send us photos or images, files, or you can just write a little blurb and let us know. And yeah, we love to hear from people. We do answer questions in the comments every once in a while too. So if you've got a question, and also we're going to try to start doing a thing. If somebody's got a question, whichever question gets the most upvotes, then we'll try to cover that in our next video. And we see all the comments that come in on a portal. So we'll go through those. And if we see comments that we haven't really addressed or we haven't talked about, then we'll cover them. And if you have questions, if you just go to our Q&A series, we've done at least on YouTube, there's probably 30 or 40 of them up there. And on the podcast, we're into the teens on the Q&A series being released there. But and if you are listening on as a podcast, we do have a lot of Q&A series that are on the podcast that you can watch on YouTube right now.
Yep. And last but not least, I've received a number of excellent recommendations of books. But if you have some, feel free to send them in and I'll add those to my list. And like I said, it's not, yes, it will be Scientology specific and centered, but not limited to only Scientology. So I have several books on recovering from cults and other cults as well that we'll be talking about.
Perfect. Awesome, guys.
Awesome.
Well, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for everybody who got it all the way to the end. And we will see you on the next one. Till next time.
Bye.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help support the channel, feel free to check out the merch store link in the description. We have Hail Xenu, Xenu is my homeboy, and BFG branded mouse pads, shirts, mugs, all sorts of other stuff in there that helps us to bring you new content on a regular basis. You can also pick up a copy of my book, Blown for Good, Behind the Iron Curtain of Scientology, in hardback, Kindle, and Audible versions as well. There's also a link to our podcast, and you can get that on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to watch another video, you can click on this link right here, or you can click on this one here, or you can click on the subscribe button right here. Thanks a lot. Until next time.